Namaste and welcome to the Som Yoga and Ayurveda podcast.
A space to dive into how we as humans can live more intentional, ethical and sustainable lives.
And how we can come into harmony with ourselves, others and natures in the process.
We share tips to help you cultivate a healthy body, calm mind and a strong purpose through the traditional Vedic wisdom of Yoga and Ayurveda.
My name is Paige. I'm a yoga teacher, a yoga therapist, but most of all, a student of this incredible ancient tradition.
And my name is Paige Taylor. I'm a yoga teacher, Ayurvedic health consultant, advocate for sustainable living and lover of all beings. And
before we get into this episode, a word from our sponsors, Som Yoga and Ayurveda. We wanted to take a moment to tell you about our upcoming offerings.
Yeah.
Because we've just released the dates for all of our trainings for 2024.
And if you're interested in hearing what we have to offer in this podcast, chances are you'd be very, very interested in partaking in either our 200-hour yoga teacher training or our 300-hour yoga teacher training.
So our teacher training program is based in Hatha Yoga. And it exists at both of those levels. The 200 introductory training, which is really just to become qualified as a yoga teacher and start to cultivate your practice. And at the 300-hour level, we're offering an advanced teacher training. So for those who have already completed a 200-hour and are looking to advance their offering. The 200-hour training, as we said, is based in Hatha Yoga and gives you an opportunity to really dive into the foundations of yoga practice. Foundations being asanas, pranayama, and meditation. The 300-hour training gives you an opportunity to dive into the more subtle aspects of yoga. And for this training specifically, the content is around the chakras, tantra, yoga nidra, and mudras.
And bandha as well.
Yeah, and a lot of bandha. So they're both starting in January 2024.
Yep.
The
200-hour is running part-time in Berwick, 3 weekends in January, February, and March, so 9 weekends in total. And it's going to be an epic training. We've got a few crew already signed up. And I think what's important to understand is our trainings are max 10 people. We never take on big groups. And this just creates a really small and intimate training environment for yourself and for us as well. The 300-hour also begins in January, and the 300-hour runs 1 weekend every month from January to July. So 7 weekends based in Berwick, and then we will culminate the experience with 2 weeks in Rishikesh, India in the September school holidays.
Very exciting.
So
and
exciting.
I think that 7 month plus 2 week format is the best training that we've ever
absolutely.
run. Because at the end of each weekend, you get a sadhana and then you get a month to practice something that is subtle and personal, and it allows you to have a really full experience of the content of the weekend. So if you're interested in either of those trainings, head to our website www.omsom.yoga and you'll find all the details in the trainings tab.
Yeah, so excited.
All right, onwards
Let's
to
get
today's
into it.
episode. What are we talking about?
Well, we thought that we would have a bit of a conversation about really what the 300-hour entails. And we haven't really gone into depth around these topics because they're so deep that we never really think we can do them justice in an hour. But we're going to give it a crack. And we're going to talk today about Samkhya philosophy, which is basically the basis of all of our trainings. If you have done just one training with us, you have learned about Samkhya philosophy.
We love Samkhya.
It is the best philosophy, in our opinion, in our humble opinion. It's what's actually on the back of our hoodies.
Go on, give us a
All
little
right.
give us a
If
little
you're watching
demo.
the video.
Samkhya, descent of consciousness.
So it's an incredibly powerful philosophy to understand. So we're going to give it a bit of a chat today.
And if you've got the hoodie and you were like, what the hell is this on the back of my hoodie? Now you will have the context in order to understand what is on the back of your hoodie.
Absolutely.
So maybe we start with this.
Cool.
What does Samkhya mean?
Basically, it's a map. And we love maps in yoga. But basically, it's a map from the descent of consciousness, meaning that it shows us how we come to be who we are on this earth through the different process of evolution.
And what does it mean, the word?
Oh,
Do you know what it means? The
no.
Sanskrit word.
Tell me.
Sankhya, it's 2 words.
Yep.
It's sama, which you might know from what? Samavriti. Samana vayu.
Balancing.
Sama means, it means the assimilation of all things. So we could think of it as everything, the totality. And then kya is the second word, and kya means to know, to realize, to experience, to understand. And so the word sankhya means literally to know everything.
Yeah, it makes
it's
sense.
the knowledge of all things.
It is.
And then the second word, darshan, is the word in Sanskrit that we use to speak to like an experiential realization, a direct perception of some specific truth. And in India, in the yoga tradition, there are what's called Shad Darshan, or the 6 philosophies of India. And Samkhya Darshan is one of those 6. The other ones are, what are they? Yoga, Mimamsa, Vedanta, Vaisheshika, and Yoga, Vedanta, Samkhya, Vaisheshika, Mimamsa, and there's one more that we don't remember the name of. You're going to get a book out. Okay, so regardless, each of those 6 philosophies have a few different things attached to them. And the main thing is that each of them have a sage connected to them. You could consider that person the founder of the philosophy. And we all know a lot about yoga philosophy and its founder, who is Patanjali. And anyone who has interest in either yoga or Ayurveda should have interest in Samkhya Darshan, because Samkhya Darshan is the context for Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. Without the knowledge of Samkhya, it's very difficult to understand what's being said in the Yoga Sutras. So the founder of the Samkhya philosophy is called Sage Kapila. And the text that this knowledge is expounded in is called the Samkhya Karika. And it was composed around the 2nd century before Common Era, which is a long, long time ago.
And that was only when it was written.
What's a century? 100 years?
I think so.
So that makes it 2nd century. It's like the year 200.
I don't really understand how the years work.
Well,
couldn't tell you what century we're in right now.
Okay. So as Paige was saying, the Samkhya Darshan, or the Samkhya philosophy, explains the flow of consciousness into matter. How was the world created? And I think that the most important thing is to say that it strays away from Darwinism. And Darwinism is what most of us have been taught in relation to how the universe was created. That there was a big bang, and from that big bang there was a cloud of gases, and eventually those gases formed and became organisms, and then those organisms began to thrive within the water, and then from the water they thrived on the land, they learned how to breathe oxygen, and then they became mammals, and those mammals eventually became humans.
So it's kind of like the opposite, but it's very interconnected. I guess that theory looks to say that matter created consciousness.
Yeah.
Whereas we look at it from consciousness creating matter. But they're so interconnected, and it's not that one's right and one's wrong. It's just different perspectives.
Yeah, they're just different perspectives. So just for now, stay with me and put Darwinism aside. Just imagine that you never learned that at school. And we're going to go on a little bit of a journey to understand how consciousness created matter. So in Samkhya Darshan, there is what's called the 24 plus 1 tattvas. What does tattva mean, Paige?
Principles.
Yeah, qualities.
Qualities, yeah.
So within this philosophy, there are 24 plus 1 qualities, so 25 qualities, and each of them play a very specific part in the creation of reality, the manifestation of your life. And the most important thing to understand is that this is speaking specifically in relation to you as a human. Samkhya speaks to how consciousness manifests as human or in the human form to have the human experience. So the first two qualities, the first two tattvas in Samkhya Darshan are called
Purusha and Prakriti.
Purusha and Prakriti. Purusha and Prakriti are some of the most abstract concepts in yoga and in Samkhya. And so I think the most important thing to understand about Purusha and Prakriti, number one, is that they're unmanifest. They're not physical, and we can't understand them through a physical lens. That actually they're the everythingness and the consciousness that perceives the everythingness. So let's start with Purusha. Purusha, there's a Sanskrit saying that unpacks the meaning of Purusha. It's Puri Seti Iti Purushaha. And it means Puri Seti Iti Purushaha. It means that which dwells in the city is Purusha. And what's the city? The city is your body. That which dwells in the body is Purusha. What dwells in the body? Consciousness. And so we can understand Purusha as that power of observation, the power of seeing, the consciousness itself that has no qualities apart from observation. Another way of understanding Purusha is just that which resides in stillness. Anything you want to add to that?
No.
You're on a listening mission right
Yeah.
now. Cool. All right. So the second quality is Prakriti. Prakriti. And Prakriti can be broken up into its syllables. Pra, Kri, Iti. Pra means prakasha. Prakasha is the word that we use for space. It's sattva. It's clear, it's light, it's pure. The second is kra, kriya. So the second quality of Prakriti is kriya, which means action, which we call rajas. The third part of Prakriti is iti, which creates the word stiti, which means stillness. Or in Sanskrit we would call it tamas. So within the word Prakriti, we have these three qualities. We're going to put them aside for a moment, but you can think of Prakriti as the desire for creation, creation itself, the movement of creation. And implied within that is everything, everything in creation, everything that's been created, and the mere desire to create. And so Samkhya Darshan starts with these two qualities that are unmanifest and existed outside of the time-space continuum. Purusha, which is the power of seeing, and Prakriti, which is the desire for creation and everything that is created. So we have the whole universe, and we have a consciousness that is perceiving it. I think this is a very important part of Samkhya because it's what separates Samkhya Darshan from the other philosophies of India, like Vedanta and the non-dual philosophies, is that because of Purusha and Prakriti, there is an implied and it's a duality that is non-negotiable. That there are two. There is me and you. There is this and that within the philosophy. And that these two are inseparable and always working within any level of reality. So, these two unmanifest qualities that are inherent to all things in the universe, at some point in the spaceless, timeless void known as shunya, have an idea. And that idea is known as Mahad. Mahad. Maha is a Sanskrit word that means the supreme, the greatest, the most ultimate. And so they have an idea, the most perfect idea, and that idea is that they desire to experience some aspect of themselves. And that aspect of self causes both of these things, Purusha and Prakriti, to fragment in some way. That Purusha, the great void, the seer of all things, the nothingness that exists beyond space and time, fragments itself in order to become individualized. And that is the desire for your very life. The desire to experience some blip of the ever unfolding universe through the human experience. That's where Samkhya starts. And so we have, and I'm going to keep repeating because I think it's important, only because I don't have a picture to show you. So you kind of have to map it out in your head.
Maybe we can attach it to the show notes.
Yeah, maybe. We can attach the picture on our website or something. Okay, so Purusha, Prakriti are what? You're going to give the recap.
Purusha is consciousness and Prakriti is creation or action.
Perfect. And they have an idea that's called?
Mahad.
And that Mahad is?
The greatest idea of you.
Yes, the idea that you are. Beautiful. And from that great idea, what is created?
Ahamkara.
Ahamkara.
Maybe a more familiar word. Maybe you know this word already.
Or asmita would be another way to say it. Ahamkara means the I am maker, the I amness. It's your ego. And so from this great idea, there is the individuated consciousness, the I am thought.
And so this doesn't mean ego as in you've got a big ego. This is like your personality almost, or like the makeup of your soul.
Yeah, that your consciousness gets separated from the ocean of consciousness.
Yeah.
Your consciousness becomes fragmented and individualized so that you can perceive or begin to perceive reality.
Yeah.
Okay. And from that
This would be like your soul? Would ahamkara be like related
it's
to
like
like
the
your
higher
individual
mind,
soul? Yeah.
the individual soul, whatever you want to call it. The what is it called? The causal body. And from this individuated Purusha, Prakriti gets to work and starts to turn itself into its three qualities, which we alluded to before, pra, kra, and iti, which are called sattva, rajas, and tamas.
And so these are the mahagunas.
And yes, they're called the mahagunas, and the word guna means to braid. It's the braid that you do in your hair. You take 3 pieces of hair and you start to weave them together. And so these 3 gunas, called sattva, rajas, and tamas, are the fabric that, or the thread that Prakriti uses to weave the fabric of existence.
Uh-huh.
Sattva is light, lightness,
Balance, clarity.
yeah, and purity.
Mm.
Rajas is
Action.
action,
Heat.
friction, movement. And tamas is darkness, heaviness,
Dullness.
dullness,
Stillness.
yeah. And the idea being that these are the basic qualities inherent within all things. That they are not necessarily separate, but within everything in creation, they exist within different quantities.
Maybe like, for an example, a rock has a lot more tamas than any of the other qualities. It's dense, it's dark, it's still, it's heavy. Whereas maybe like a bird could be perceived as something with rajas, that it's always moving, it's always, in flight, it's always acting. And then sattva can be perceived almost as a little bit more subtle, like the rays of sun as they stream down into the earth. That they're warming, but it's very pure and it's very clear and it's not so tangible like the other two.
Perfect. And these three gunas also make up the basic qualities of your mind and the basic states of mind, which we'll come back to in a little bit. But they're very helpful for us to understand in relation to our mind in practice, whether that's yoga or meditation practice. Okay, so from here, the three gunas go on to create 5. Yeah, so 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 3, 3 becomes 5. This is the natural movement of things, and you'll find it in the Fibonacci sequence, which is all throughout nature. So the 5 becomes what we know as the Mahabhutas. The Mahabhutas are a makeup of the combinations of the gunas. And so you might know the Mahabhutas as the elements, the 5 elements. And the 5 element theory is steeped heavily into the yoga tradition, and it's the basis for Ayurveda as well. So what are the 5 elements, Paige?
We have earth as the most tangible or the most physical of the elements. And then we have water, we have fire, we have air, and we have space or ether.
Perfect. Now, if you get into the feeling of the gunas, you can start to understand how the gunas create the elements. So the first element is Akash, or space, the space element. And this is pure sattva. It's very subtle. It's very spacious. It's very pure, meaning that there's not much more to it. It's almost emptiness, but not quite. It's still within the universe, and it's still manifest in some capacity. So we can say that sattva creates Akash, the space element. And then that sattva and rajas, the pure quality and the movement quality, create the second element, which is called vayu, or air element. And you think about what's the difference between space and air. Space is not breathable. Actually, it's almost a nothingness where nothing can exist. But air can be breathed, and if I fan my hands, I can actually move the air. That within that air quality or that air element, there is more capacity for movement, which implies rajas, that rajas is present. So we have ether or akash, we have vayu or air element, and then rajas comes in to create what's called agnibhuta, which is the fire element. And fire transforms everything that it touches. Nothing that is touched by fire is not transformed. So it is pure rajas. From here, we have sattva and tamas coming together to create the jal tattva, the water element. And you think about water, it is sattva because it nourishes all things. And it is tamas because if you jump from a high enough place, it's very, very hard when you hit it. So it has more, what's the word I'm looking to? Volume than fire or air. There's more surface tension, but at the same time, it has that inherently nourishing quality to it that is sattva. So we get the water element next. Finally, pure tamas creates the earth element. Earth is dense and dark and still. It does not move much. So that's the elements. We have space, air, fire, water, and earth.
Maybe let's recap again. So we've got Purusha and Prakriti.
Which are consciousness and the desire for creation.
And then they come down to create Mahad.
And Mahad is the supreme idea that is your very existence.
And then it comes down to create Ahamkara.
Which is the I amness that forms the basis of your personality, your soul, and your mind.
And then we split into three, the Mahagunas, Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas.
Which are the qualities of light, movement, and darkness.
And then we get to where we are now, the Mahabhutas, the 5 elements.
And they are Akasha or space, Vayu or air, Agni or fire, Jala or water, and Prithvi or earth. Now, this is where it gets very interesting because there are a lot of tattvas that are implied within the Mahabhutas. And they are specifically what are called the karmindriyas, the gyanindriyas, and what's the third one?
Karmendriyas, Gyanendriyas, organs of action, sense organs, and then...
It's like the desire behind them. Okay. So, each of the elements creates a desire. A desire within the subtle body to experience the world in a specific way. And so each of those elements is connected to what's called a karmindriya and a gyanindriya. A karmindriya is the organ of action, meaning that it will move within the world in some specific way. And a gyanindriya is an organ of perception, meaning it's a sense organ, one of your senses. So, the earth element is connected to, do you know what they are?
I was looking for the missing one.
The sense organ is your nose. And the smell. And the organ of action is?
Your anus?
Your anus, yeah, to excrete.
Yeah.
So there's desire to smell and then the desire to excrete. And they're connected to the earth element.
This might be going a little bit too deep into it for the podcast.
Well, you wanted the beginning of the 300 hour. The water element is connected to the desire to procreate, so it's your genitals, and the desire to taste. The fire element is connected to
the eyes, the sight.
The desire to see and the desire to move, so your feet. The air element is connected to the desire to hear and the desire to speak. And finally, the space element is
connected to the desire to feel. Touch?
Touch, no, actually, we've got it backwards. Touch is air.
Okay.
The desire to touch and the desire to grasp.
This is too much.
Sorry, it's the
podcast.
hands. Touch and grasp, and then for the space element, it's speak and to hear.
Okay.
No, because it is important, because then this creates your physical body.
Absolutely.
And so the idea is that Samkhya is explaining how Purusha and Prakriti come together. They have this great idea to experience some part of themselves. That creates your individuated self, which creates the gunas within the mind, which then creates the elements, which then creates the 5 senses and the 5 organs of action, which then creates your physical body. And your physical body is governed by what?
The doshas.
The doshas. And the doshas are a mixture of all of those 5 elements. So what are the doshas? We have
Vata dosha, which is comprised of air element and space element. We have Pitta dosha, comprised of fire element and water element. And we have Kapha dosha, comprised of water element and earth element.
And so those doshas go on to create a whole bunch of different things, namely the different organs in the body and the different parts that comprise all of the organs. And then on top of that, we have the shrotams, we have the dhatus, and we have the malas. And so the understanding here is that this is the consciousness, the intelligence that has created your physical existence. It tells us how you got here, how I got here, how we got here. And by understanding this in a very deep way through felt experience, we can begin to work with these 25 tattvas in order to bring balance, to bring harmony to ourselves, to our bodies, to our minds, and to our lives. And so it's really like a reverse engineering process, is that once you understand where you've come from and how you've gotten here, you can start to work at all of these layers, the physical body, the subtle body, and the causal body, to bring balance and to move towards the experience of yoga. Now, Paige's gotten a little bit into a mindset that this is too much for the podcast, and it is too much for the podcast. And the idea is like it should be overwhelming to you, because you might not have ever heard this before. But the reason why it is important is that without understanding this, you can't understand yoga. Without understanding this in an incredibly subtle way, you will just be picking random asanas and random breath techniques and random meditation techniques. This philosophy gives you the knowledge of what is the effect. It gives you the knowledge of cause and effect. That the cause is hidden in the effect. And so when we can understand the world through this lens, we can understand the effects of our practice through this lens, and we can understand what practices, if we select them in this intelligent way, will give us the result that we need in order to move towards the state of balance that we desire.
So yes, this, although we expressed at the start, this is the map of the descent from consciousness into matter, from Purusha and Prakriti into dosha, into our physical body, into our unique makeup. It is also a map that we can use to create a path, a journey, a practice from our unique position in life, our unique presentation of the doshas and the elements in our body, to follow back up the path to once again unite with consciousness, which is the state of yoga. And so that's what Aaron is talking about, is that we can use this as a back engineering kind of process to work out where we are, what's going on in our lives, what's at play with the gunas and the elements, to be able to backtrack our path towards the state of yoga.
Yeah. Master system stuff.
It's master, yeah, for sure.
And I think what's really cool is that each of these levels has a specific prana related to it. That what we're speaking about is prana. What we're speaking about is the subtlety of yoga. And that, yes, we can have a physical experience in yoga. Yes, we can have a experience of the body and of an outwards self. But this map gives us access to the subtle parts of yoga. And that's really what our 300-hour course is about. And as you start to move through the practice of yoga, that's what yoga is about. It's about refining your experience, becoming more subtle, and starting to map out, in the same way that we do the physical body, the subtle body. And so with this understanding of the Samkhya Darshan, we get an incredible map in order to understand what is one of the most misunderstood things in yoga, which is the chakras. That within this is implied the chakras and the nadis and the marmas and all of this subtle energetic stuff that we talk about in yoga but very rarely understand how they all fit together. That if you understand in a really deep way the elements, you will understand the chakras, because the chakras are the pranic manifestation of the elements. And from that manifestation of the element creates the nadis, Shushumna, Ida, Pingala, and all of the other auxiliary nadis, which create the marmas, and the marmas go out to create the entirety of your physical body. That's how intelligence, or prakriti, makes its way into the physical body. That's how your cells hold the intelligence to create a perfect liver and a perfect stomach and a perfect brain and perfect eyes. And so by becoming aware of the body, we become aware of the intelligence that is informing the body. So that's Samkhya Darshan. I hope that you had fun today. Yeah, every time that we have this conversation with a group, it's just like,
and then we also, like, on our trainings, we spend 3 hours on this topic. And right now we've given you like a 30-minute rundown. It's pretty incredible, really.
Yeah.
And it's also one of those things that the more you listen, the more you hear the lectures, the more you connect with this philosophy and this pondering and this process, the deeper your experience or your understanding gets.
Yeah, and I think, like, for me personally, like, the first time I heard this, it was the same. I was like, oh my God, it all makes sense. Everything makes sense now. It all fits together. But the more I studied this, the more my understanding developed. And yeah, we literally share it on every training. And then every now and then we have students that come back and do another training and another training and another training. And every time they hear the Samkhya lecture, there's something new in it for them.
Yeah.
There's some new understanding or some new correlation that allows you to understand how your actions affect your experience. And really, that's all that yoga is. It's cause and effect. And it's the same with Ayurveda.
Absolutely.
It's cause and effect. We're working with the law of karma, that everything that you do has a result. And in order to understand it, we can use this as a map.
Yeah.
Just one of many. And yeah, I think that, you know, the most important thing to do is to spend time with all of these qualities in your own practice. And that's kind of how we've developed the 300-hour. It's a 7-month course. And over those 7 months plus 2 weeks, but over the first 7 months, we work through each of the 7 chakras and each of the 5 elements, and within that the 3 doshas, and within that the gunas, that we give all of these qualities enough time not only to unpack within
The mental field.
within the mental field, but also within the physical body and within the psychology of yoga and within the philosophy and within mantra, but also within our own personal practice and to really have that internal experience. And I think that really just is what yoga needs to be, was meant to be, and should be a slow refinement of experience.
Yeah, and the best way to gain knowledge and to gain insight and wisdom and embodied understanding in the yoga tradition is through practice and through these various different methods of jnana, of study, of philosophy, of practice, of so many different things that, you know, we can share these concepts in a very abstract, you know, verbal to verbal kind of opportunity or lecture like this. But the understanding will only come from your own experience and will only come from your own integration of these topics in various different ways.
That will unfold over time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, you know, a lot of people come into yoga and, you know, in the beginning for many of us, it's all about the body. Like, you know, sometimes I'll have yoga therapy clients that come in and are like, oh, that's where my rib cage is. That's where my pelvis is. You know, it's about starting to just map these very physical experiences and starting to orient yourself within your body.
Yeah.
And depending on how much time you've spent in your body as a child growing up, that could be a period of years. Absolutely. You know, some people come to yoga and they've spent the last 20 years dancing or exercising or moving their body in some way that's allowed them to have a deep level of body awareness. And other people come to yoga and it's the first movement they've ever done in their life. They never played any sport or did any exercise or did any dancing or anything. And so that physical mapping, that physical orienting takes some time. But eventually, as time moves on and you do begin to orient yourself within the physical body, then there's a deeper layer where we start to work with prana, where we start to orient ourselves and map out the subtle body, the nadis and the chakras and the marmas. And that, again, takes time. That
Absolutely.
could take 10, 20 years. Right? To really map out all of these subtle energetic pathways in the body.
Yeah, and they're just such subtle concepts and such subtle philosophies that, yeah, it's not like the way we learn in this Western world of, you know, 2 + 2 = 4. But even then, that's so subtle. Like, what do you mean 2 + 2 = 4? Like, how does that understanding even come forth? But regardless, like, you know, we think that everything has to be so logical and so straightforward and well understood through the mind. Whereas these philosophies are different and they're subtle and they take time. So let it be like that.
Once you understand and have the full experience of the pranic realm, then there's the mind as well to unpack. That there's a whole subtlety to the inner mental experience as well. And so, yeah, I think what's important and why we decided to share such a complex and big topic on the podcast is just that let this integrate into your life over the next 60 years of practice.
Yeah, and maybe this is the first time you've ever heard this. Maybe this will be the only time you've ever heard this, and that's okay. But it's still like a very, very powerful concept. Or maybe it's the first time you've heard something like this and it sparks that interest. And that's kind of all we ever want to do as yoga teachers, is introduce concepts that maybe are just a little bit out of your depth, so that you're intrigued to continue your practice and to continue your exploration of your own inner landscape.
Yeah, and to allow that exploration to unfold as awareness. That's what yoga is all about, the unfoldment of awareness, moving us towards a more aware state, a more connected state.
Yeah.
And it's philosophies like this that allow that state to unfold for us. So yeah, Samkhya Darshan is context for yoga and Ayurveda. If you're interested in yoga, if you're interested in Ayurveda, take the time to research this. There is a text that you can read. It's called the Samkhya Karika. It was originally composed by the sage Kapila, but you'll probably find a translation into English by anyone. I'm sure that there's many, many different translations.
Yes, and maybe just on that's not just like a book to just put on your book list and like light afternoon reading. When we say text, it really almost speaks to textbook, and when we say textbook, it almost speaks to poetry. That these great ancient texts are written in almost riddles, but that just like contemplations and things you have to ponder. It's not that book might just explain everything that you need to know in a very easy to understand way. Samkhya for dummies, maybe.
Maybe that could
maybe
be our
we can
book.
write it. Sahara Rose wrote Ayurveda for dummies. So
Interesting. But yeah, the more that this unfolds for you, the more context you will have for your yoga practice and for your experience of Ayurveda. And that's all that we can hope for. And if you really want to dive into it, I would highly consider joining us for either the 200-hour or the 300-hour training. And especially like if you're a yoga teacher, if you've done a 200-hour and this is the first time you're learning about Samkhya, the 300-hour is the expansion.
experience, yeah.
It's the full experience of everything that we've spoken about today. So have a look on the website, check out the offering.
And if you're just like interested, we run smaller trainings as well. Like it doesn't have to be so daunting. I believe we do Samkhya even on the yin training.
Yeah, we do. And the yin training's coming up when?
November, 2 weekends in November. So, if you're not ready to commit to a full 200-hour or 300-hour, but you want the taster, we have lots of smaller trainings on offer. The yin will be the last one for a few months, which will be November this year, 2023. And then we'll go full steam ahead into 200-hour and 300-hour territory for the first 6 months of next year, and then we'll reassess. But yeah, I think just on that, 200-hour and 300-hour, 300-hour is only for people that have done 200 hours in the past, but that's not to say that you have to be a practicing yoga teacher for our trainings. You don't have to want to be a teacher. You can want to share yoga in your own unique way that doesn't show up as a 60-minute class. It can be, unique to your own experience and your own expression.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, then. Well, if you've enjoyed today's episode, please share it. Share it with someone. Hopefully someone that won't get overwhelmed by the topic of conversation, but share it with someone that's interested in yoga or that practices yoga.
Or maybe listen to it again tomorrow.
Yeah, and the next day, and the next day, and the next day, until it sinks in. But yeah, that's all that we ask. We don't have any sponsors. We're not charging for advertisements.
I mean, this was like a long plug for our courses, but that's the best kind of sponsor, right? All that we can ask from these podcasts is that you feel the call, if you resonate, to come and study with us, to come and practice with us, to come and say hey to us, that we want to build connections in this yoga community that are built on these deep conversations and built on these deep understandings and ponderings that, the two of us sit down and have all the time. It's so important for us to find connection. And so, we don't make anything from this podcast and we don't have those weird ads in there unless you're on Spotify free version. Maybe there's ads in these. That would be funny.
I want my cut. But really, it's just us, Paige and I are Som Yoga and Ayurveda, and it's the two of us here in this factory full time, and we do everything in this podcast from recording to editing to releasing, every single part of it. And so the best thing that you can do to help us is either come and practice with us or share this content and see how it ripples out into the world.
Exactly.
All right. I think that's enough talking. You know where to find us, www.omsom.yoga, or on social media, omsom.yoga on all platforms. Hari Om. We love you. I love you, Paige.
I love you too.
Bye, guys.